Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you with another episode of This is WCW, where the big boys play. This is episode 4, and as the title tells you, this one's mainly going to be dealing with the Halloween Havoc 1995 pay-per-view. But before I get there, I will be giving some loose thoughts on the Nitros leading up to this, from the post-Fall Brawl 1 to then. I didn't take notes for it, so it's just going to be a very quick overview. Overall, I thought the episodes of Nitro after Fall Brawl before this were pretty good, and they were decent. I mean, nothing, that stood out immensely happened, other than a few things I will mention individually, but you could definitely tell Nitro was still trying to find its identity at this point. It's chugging along. It has some good matches, has some matches, but for a 1-hour show, it's pretty decent. Ric Flair and Arn are continuing their feud. There was even a match that had Flair and Sting taking on Arn and Flying Brian, if I remember right, in a tag team match. Sting didn't come out at first, mainly because he wanted to see that Flair was on the up and up. And then he came out and he's like, yeah, you prove that you're on the up and up. Flair, I'm siding with you on this one. We're going to take these two out. Then, of course, Chris Benoit making his WCW debut, coming in going, so this is where the big boys play, eh? And then his first televised match being with Eddie Guerrero, which this is one of those things that even without retrospect you would go, of course. And buddy, so how Guerrero had to be in the back talking with Bischoff going, hey Holmes, Benoit's coming in. I want to be his first match, yes eh? I'd probably do that in a voice, but I don't want to. And their match was pretty decent. I mean, I haven't seen all of their matches, so I can't say this is their best match, but I can't honestly say it was their worst match. It was a good TV match between two technical wrestlers, especially since they were in their prime at this point. They were young. I mean, they hadn't gotten their characters yet, but they were very young. But they were semi-experienced by this point. It was a pretty good match. The Hulk Hogan storyline from Fall Brawl, all that. The beginning of him wearing black even before the NWO because he's mourning, and of course them shaving his mustache. That is such a Hulk Hogan thing. It's like when Earthquake jumped on him for them to get the Hulkamaniacs to send stuff in, shaving off his mustache. Even Ted DiBiase and WWE villains Hogan fought with didn't do that, but Kevin Sullivan in the Dungeon of Doom, they're so dastardly, they shaved Hogan's mustache. Ooh. No, it works. Though you can tell some of the fans are into it, but some of them aren't, because when Hogan comes out on this pay-per-view, there are audibly noticeable boos, which I will get to in a moment. This storyline with the Dungeon of Doom, I'd say at this point, just looking at it in a retrospective thing, the only thing that is interesting to me is seeing Kevin Sullivan work in this puppet master type thing. Though granted, I haven't seen any footage personally of when he was the devil worshipper. This is pale in comparison just by reputation, but still it's nice to see him working here. And of course, this is where Big Show started when he was the Giant, and this is pre-first match, because Havoc was his first match, but seeing him in his early days, you can definitely see how he developed between then and even his early WWE stuff and how he is now. You can definitely tell he grew a lot. And I could definitely see what Bruce Pritchard meant on one of his podcasts. I don't remember what episode it was, when he said that one of the things they had to deal with when Show first came over was getting him out of his Hulk Hogan promo phrase. Just seeing one of the promos on one episode of Nitro, I'm like, aha, that's what Bruce was talking about. Definitely see Hogan's influence there. Now, on to the main event of this episode, Halloween Havoc 1995. It took place on October 29th, 1995, emanating from the Joe Louis Arena in Detroit, Michigan. And it had a 13,000 attendance, if I can even read numbers properly. Which is I think it's a pretty good house. I don't know how much the venue can hold. That's probably one thing I should have looked up. Lazy ass researcher is lazy. But it's still a pretty good one, especially for this point. 95 was not a good year. Shivani and Bobby the Brain were on commentary. And they do a pretty good job on this pay-per-view, especially Bobby as the night goes on. There were a couple moments throughout the night where they did seem antagonistic towards each other, but given the story that's being told throughout the night. I can kind of see why it is. And I remember when Shivani and Conrad did this on one episode not long ago. Shivani had a lot of stuff to joke about. Maybe one of these days go back and rewatch this one. This one seems like it'd be a fun one to rewatch. The opening match was Johnny B. Bad getting a TV title match against DDP. Now the reason this happened is that at Fall Brawl, Bad won a match to get a U.S. title shot, but he was unable to make it, so someone else got the match instead. And when Bad showed up, he mentioned that someone had popped his tires. DDP came out talking smack to him, and he said something about 4 tires. And then Bad's like, "How did you know it was 4 tires?" and punched him in the face. So it looks like DDP is the one that did it. And it's a little interesting to see DDP this early in his career, because it's the first time I'm watching his older stuff, and you definitely see how he grew between this and late WCW when he was a 3-time world champion. Definitely a wrestler who learned his craft and developed it over time to where he actually could get over in the main event level. And it's still interesting to see how he was as a low to mid-card wrestler, at least spot-wise. And here he seemed like a pretty good TV title level heel. And his match with Johnny B. Bad was pretty good. Mainly because it's a pretty good opening match. I don't know how it'd be if you were to put it later in the card, but as an opening match, it fit its role perfectly, especially considering how over Johnny B. Bad was at this time. Just listen to all the people cheering him when he comes out. Especially since Bad pulls the old fake out entrance surprise attack spot at the beginning, which I thought worked given that DDP had besmirched his car to face those tires. You never pop another man's tire and expect to get away with it. There was a bucket head spot. Essentially, someone gets a bucket on their head. DDP had control of the match about the middle of it, and Bad at that point got a reverse near fall, and there was the tape choke spot that we've seen in a lot of these matches. Here it was pretty good to see because it fit the moment. Bad made a comeback. He got a near fall following a double axe handle and a powerbomb, but he got the pinfall after Max Muscles accidentally clotheslined Page from the apron, and the crowd went wild. When I said Bad was over, Bad was over. Now Bad has gold. This is his second time with the TV title, and after this he would hold it at least one other time. And the match went just literally over 17 minutes, 17:01 by the clock I went by. And it's a pretty lengthy opener, but definitely got the crowd going for it. This wasn't the first match they saw that night, but it was the first one on TV. Of course, kind of makes up for the next match, because the next match was such a short one at 1:30. It was Randy Savage defeating the Zodiac, a.k.a. Brutus the Barber Beefcake, with the elbow drop. It was essentially just a glorified squash match. Zodiac got in some offense, then Macho Man took control and won with the elbow. Oh, yeah! And this is the setup, Randy versus Lex later in the night. After this, we get a Mean Gene interview with Johnny B. Bad, and it's essentially a dreams come true interview. That's a line that Bad said at one point, and that just sums up the majority of what he said. It was a decent interview. Our third match was Kurosawa with Colonel Robert Parker defeating Road Warrior Hawk. The match went a little over 3 minutes. It was a meh match. For these two guys, it is what it is. Nothing more, nothing less. The point of the match, it's revenge on Hawk's part for his arm being stretched in a previous match. And Colonel Parker helped Kurosawa win with the old leverage pin. There were boos, of course, the heels getting a cheap victory. I really wish we saw more stuff like this nowadays in the modern product. I think that's one thing that's missing is heels doing dastardly stuff to get over, to get the heat. And some stuff was actually thrown. And at one point around this, Bobby said, "So what?" Of course, Bobby, Brian Heenan, playing the heel. Always great to hear him do the heel stick. After this, the Mean Gene interviewed the Macho Man. And as he put it, 1 down, 1 to go. And he was questioned regarding the Monster Truck match. And he said essentially what you would expect Macho Man to say in this situation. I didn't jot down the notes, so I don't have it word for word, but given the storyline at this time, he says what you would expect Macho to say. The fourth match was Sabu with his uncle the Sheik in his corner holding a sword, defeating Masked JL, who is Jerry Lynn under a mask, in a little over 3 minutes. As Bobby put it, these are dangerous people. And it was a very quick and very aerial match. And Sabu got the pin following a lateral press. And literally right when the match was over, the Sheik threw a fireball into Lynn's face. It's one of those things that you have to be looking just at the right moment, or it's a blink or you miss it thing. Because I didn't even notice it at first because of how the camera was angled. And as Shivani would say, WCW, typical. But then when they showed it again, I'm like, oh, that's why I didn't see it the first time. It literally is an almost blink and you'll miss it little thing. But I don't know if it really added anything to this because it kind of seemed unnecessary. I mean, if you're going to do that, maybe that should have been pre-pinned. But I guess they wanted Sabu to get a clean victory and then have his uncle do the dastardly deed. If I remember right, Sabu wasn't in WCW much longer after this, so I don't know if it really served anything. After this, we got a Dungeon of Doom promo, which what you would expect. The funny thing I noted is that Sullivan had a "what the fuck am I doing" expression on his face during this promo. At least that's what it came off to me when I saw that. I'm like, oh, that is so funny. He's probably thinking, oh, what the hell are we doing? Hogan needs a creative control clause. We gotta cater to his whim. And the guy doing the promo was essentially just a screaming man in a chair. I don't get it. Maybe it's because I wasn't watching WCW at the time, so watching this all in retrospect, something like that comes across as weird, but it's like, just weird. Then we get Mean Gene interviewing Hogan, and they give away a Harley Davidson. That's the extent of that. Then we get Lex's match with Ming. It went about 13 minutes, and it ended on the DQ. At one point, Ming used a foreign object, which I really missed that spot too. Digging inside the tights, hitting someone with a foreign object, putting it back away in the tights and getting the pin. But the count was interrupted by Sullivan. It's one of those moments like, what the hell? Even Ming is like, what the hell, man? Which, at that moment, I'm thinking, what the heck? Then, of course, once we get to the Savage match, and even the finish, it makes more sense later. Giant then does an interview involving what's going to happen that night, which the interview was okay. Like I said, you could tell the Giant's still in his early phase. A little less so here than in a Nitro interview. But that outfit he's wearing for the Monster Truck thing was weird. I mean, at this point when I was watching it, I was talking to a couple buddies on Facebook Messenger, and I even had to pause and turn the camera around so they could see it, because what is with that outfit? And how did they find one big enough for Giant to wear? Did they have to have it specially made, which I'm guessing, or did they have to look in the back? Hey, Giant, let's see if we got any of these Monster Truck outfits big enough for this big fella. Well, we happen to have one, but we're going to have to hem it a little bit. Now, before the tag team match involving Flair, there was a lot of "We Want Flair" chants. Makes sense, because, you know, even when he was a heel during this part of WCW, more so later on, the fans could not get enough of Flair. Sting and Flair got the victory over Arn and Pillman by DQ. And even though it was a decent match in ring-wise, the ending makes a lot of this build-up stuff a little pointless, because Flair turns on Sting, and with Arn and Pillman, he reforms the Horsemen. Now, considering that Flair and Arn seemed to be in a blood feud before this is one of those what the hell moments, like, only in professional wrestling. Only in professional wrestling. Maybe I'd be saying that even more if I went back after this and watched the stuff on Saturday night and the previous pay-per-views that led to Flair and Arn having their match, but it's just one of those things like, only in WCW and only in professional wrestling would something like this happen. One of those things you just put your hands in the hair and go, frick it, I'll just go with it. We'll see how it goes after this. It's one of those things that you just never trust Flair. He always ends up turning on you in the end. Next, we got the infamous Monster Truck match, which probably one of the few times I was just loosely paying attention while rewatching this. Which, in case you're wondering, I watched this sporadically in little bursts, which is why outside of my notes, there's not a lot of stuff I'm mentioning about certain things. But this one, After the match, which Hogan won, the Giant was going to throw him off the building, and he's the one that gets end up thrown off the building. And Hogan's reaction is like, it's a very valid reaction because you're like, oh crap. Even though the guy just tried to throw you off, you're responsible for a human being going off a building. Now, of course, they filmed this the night before, but tried to make it seem like it was live. But I'm sure there probably were some fans that even noticed that at the time, going, wait a minute, there's no monster trucks up there right now. But that's part of the suspension of disbelief, especially if you're part of the live audience. If you're just part of the audience who bought the pay-per-view, you're going to be none the wiser unless you live in Detroit and you happen to be around where those two buildings were. I did like that for the commentary on this. They actually had the guy that designed the truck. I didn't jot his name down, but it was nice that they had him there describing, the specs for it, how much tires weigh, how much the truck weighed, all that jazz. Next, Lex and Randy locked up. The match was a hair over 5 minutes. For what it was what you would expect out of a match between these two individuals. It was okay. Savage got the win with an elbow, so protecting the Macho Man's finish. Right before the finish, Lex got knocked into Jimmy Hart, who was up on the apron conversing with the referee, which, as the announcers were talking about it, it's like, oh, he must be trying to tell the ref about what's going on with Hogan and the Giant, so the main event. Which, of course, that's also part of it, but then we also got the ending of the main event to consider, which I will bring that up in just a moment. So, some of the stuff we've seen this night is nice little foreshadowing, but then it's kind of overshadowed by the most infamous moment of this main event. Now, before we get to it, there was some delaying, which makes sense given that the Giant was thrown off a building, that they'd be doing this going, oh, is the match even going to go on? And Bobby the Brain was even ranting like, we have all this technology, we can talk to people on the moon, and we can't even find out what's going on with this match. Bobby really sold us very well in one of Shivani's lines to him. Like, if there's an opening in the producer spot if you want it. Basically saying, hey, if you think you can do a better job of this, you can do it. Which, considering that in WWE, Tony Schiavone was a producer, he knows what he's talking about when he's saying stuff like this. Now, in the main event, the Giant defeated Hogan by DQ. Now, it wasn't announced at the pay-per-view, but Giant was awarded the WCW title, because of this. I won't mention that until the next one. It's a little convoluted, but he did win. As Hogan came out, there were some noticeable boos, as I noticed, which, of course, one of the catalysts for Hogan turning heel, if you want to believe his side of the story. Probably for the best, though, because why fight it? Go with the crowd. Giant takes control at one point, then Hulk makes a comeback. From an in-ring standpoint, if you've seen any of Hogan's main event matches, you know what to expect from this. But I thought from in-ring perspective, it was pretty decent. I mean, considering this was the Giant's first televised match, and he was going in there with Hogan. I mean, Hogan was still, he wasn't like, he wasn't a spring chicken at this point, but he wasn't how he would be later on. He could still go a little bit, but considering who's in the match, it being decent is a good thing. There was a couple back and forths, Giant had control, Hogan had control, Giant had control, Hogan had control. At one point, Giant tried to do a leg drop to Hogan but missed. That's how he took control of the match at that point. There was a bear hug spot, and Hogan tried to do a second comeback, but it went into a choke slam, which Hogan kicked out of and started hulking up, brother. And Hogan body slammed the Giant, which makes sense considering they're in the state of Michigan, where he had body slammed Andre the Giant about 10 years, a little less than 10 years before. And considering at this point Giant was the kayfabe son of Andre, it made sense to do that. But before Hogan could capitalize, Jimmy Hart hit the referee. I love how Bobby tries to make it seem like he didn't do it. Van threw something at the ref. Hart then whacked Hogan with the WCW title, and the Giant bear hugged him. The Macho Man and Lex came out. Jimmy whacked Macho Man with the belt, and then Lex turned on the Macho Man. And then they all ganged up on Hogan. And as Giant has him in the bear hug, who should come out but the Yetai? And the fans were booing at that point because they know this gimmick is just a crock of crap. And that is the reason why Tony Schiavone pronounced it the Yetai instead of Yeti. Because 1, it was a boring gimmick, and 2, because it didn't even look like a Yeti. It didn't look like a giant ape-looking thing. It looked like a mummy. Even though he was taller than the giant, his gimmick sucked. And of course, doing the dual bear hug, it made it look like they were dry humping Hogan. Overall, I'd say without that moment at the end involving the Yetai, this pay-per-view would just be decent, but one of those ones you could skip other than some story moments if you're going through it in the big scheme of things. But it's just that one moment with the Yetai that became so infamous that people remember this pay-per-view's name. It's just like a couple Halloween Havocs later, Hogan Warrior 2 being so infamously bad. It's one of those things. It's one of those things that people remember this pay-per-view, but not for the right reasons. And if it wasn't for that reason, they wouldn't remember it at all. So it's one of those things. Is it better to be forgotten or remembered for something bad? It's one of those things. I'd say I'd rather be forgotten than be remembered for something so stupid as the Yetai. And another funny thing to mention is Michael Buffer's announcing. Just some of the sentences he structured during his announcing thing got me chuckling a little bit. Like, really, Michael Buffer? That's how you're wording that? If you watch the match and see the opening, you'll see what I mean. In conclusion, like I said, this pay-per-view, decent overall, but with a terrible ending. I wouldn't say it ruins it, but just it just makes you wonder, what were they thinking? Oh, that's right, Hogan's creative control. That's what they were thinking. Anyway, that concludes episode 4 of This Is WCW. Stay tuned. Next one, we'll be continuing on with the Nitro ones. Next one, I might do the next one on the aftermath of Halloween Havoc and maybe the lead up to World War III and maybe World War III. But then after that, I'm going to take a little break from the Nitro ones and then go back and watch something else from WCW's past. And that's probably how I'll do interludes from now on.